Hi, everyone. This is Joni McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I'm fortunate to be speaking with Steve Berger. Steve is a really smart guy who is a great connector of people and is always building networks of like minded, open minded people who are interested in learning new things. He is really terrific that way, and I feel so fortunate to know him. He reached out to me during the early days of the pandemic, and we've been friends ever since. Steve is a graduate of Princeton University. He majored in English literature. He went on after that to get a JD from UVA and practiced law for some time. And then he pivoted to the financial industry after he got an MBA at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. He's a well-rounded, well-educated thinker who has a particular interest in Austrian economics and free market thinking. He is a former member of the Mises Institute Board of Directors, and has been very involved with them. And then also in his retirement, he is a high school tennis coach, and he does many other things, which he'll talk about. He is going to talk to me today about how he views the pandemic through the lens of free market thinking, through the lens of Austrian economics. And it's a different kind of take on the vaccines, the mandates, and the whole lockdown scenario. I learned a lot from it, and it was just an interesting conversation. Before I get to introducing Steve, I would just like to wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas. I hope that this season isn't too frenetic for you. I'll probably take a week off or two. And in the meantime, if you do like this podcast, please like it and give me a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or share it with a friend. That would really help. And I really appreciate you taking your very valuable time to listen to the podcast. It's been a fun experiment to do. And I may do a couple of episodes just solo to talk about a couple of things that I'm finding are really on my mind these days. So, anyway, without further delay, um, let's get to it. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm very glad to be here. We talked during the pandemic, and it's nice to meet once again via this form of social podcasting.
Yes, you are, I have to say for everyone, a great connector of people, a great networker. You like to collect a network of open-minded thinkers and like-minded people, and you're always connecting people and working on that. So I appreciate that, and that is indeed how you and I met. But beyond that, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself that you'd like them to know before we jump in?
Sure. I graduated college in 76, went to law school straight out of college, which in retrospect was a bit of a mistake. I might circle back to that later on, but I practiced law for 4 or 5 years and then switched gears, went to the Tuck School at Dartmouth, got an MBA, and transitioned out of that into an investment consulting position at Cambridge Associates, which mainly at the time consulted to nonprofit colleges and universities, including Dartmouth College, where your son went.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for 13 years, and I became a firm specialist in the area of what's called marketable alternative investments, otherwise known as hedge funds. And I specialized in that, giving advice to lots of institutions on how to put together portfolios of hedge funds. And then I branched out with two colleagues at that firm, and we started a hedge fund of funds in 2000, launched in 01, and managed that for about 20 years, at which point I determined, along with my partners, that I wanted to just focus on my own capital and other outside interest I had, and we returned capital over a 2-year or so period. We got most of it returned, had a couple tag-ins at the very end, but I essentially have been retired from that day job since middle of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and have spent my time since then on a host of other interests that I've had for a long time, whether it's involvement with Free Market Research Institute, the Mises Institute. I was on their board for a long, long time. been involved with high school coaching and teaching from time to time, and met you during the COVID pandemic through your organization that you co-founded at the time, No College Mandates. And I think I just reached out to you somehow, and we connected and talked and hit it off.
Hmm. Yeah, and you were very helpful because you connected us with some people who were terrific thinkers and writers that really helped us craft our message and get our letters written so that we could send them to all the people at the colleges who summarily, for the most part, ignored them.
Yeah, yeah,
But at least they were put on notice. I will tell you that because they were definitely team narrative in the
yeah, yeah,
institutions.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so you obviously have a great deal of experience in the financial world, and you are a reader of Austrian economics, and quite conversant in it. I recently listened to a presentation you gave at the Mises Institute to what's called the Mises Academy, is it, or
Mises University.
Mises
It's a
University?
summer offering to mainly undergraduates, but some early graduate students. It's an intensive week-long uh, lecture boot camp on Austrian economics with a little bit of political philosophy and revisionist history sprinkled into it. And it's a great event. I think they must get 100+ students there, all paid for by donors to the
Mhm.
institute.
Well, and it's the kind of education they're not going to get at the traditional university and higher education today. You gave that talk in 2023, and this will sort of tee off what we're going to talk about today. You were looking at the lens of the COVID vaccines. You said, okay, you can say, let's look at team narrative, team dissident. You could look at the data on both sides. And yet, at the end of the day, maybe a more useful way to look at that was through the lens of free market economics. So, I want to touch on that in a little bit, but first, I want to start out with an idea that you had to talk about, and that is the notion that COVID lockdowns and policies could not have occurred, would not have occurred if we didn't have the Federal Reserve. And that's an interesting way to look at it rather than looking at it through just politics, like the Democrats or the Republicans did this or that. Why does that institution enable things like the complete overreach and tyranny we saw during the COVID lockdowns?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's interesting because the Fed it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, and not many people really know what they do or understand what they do, and they basically, if you strip out all the fancy language that they throw out there, whether it's quantitative easing or reserve management, what they basically do at bottom is print money and monetize the debt. Something that if it were done by you or I would be called counterfeiting, but if it's done by the Federal Reserve, it's called monetary policy. And the Fed is a 100 plus year old institution that was uh, established back in Wilson's administration in 1913. But it wasn't until really the last 25 years that its monetization of debt went into kind of hyperdrive. And by that, uh, just to back up, a government can it can manage its budget either through taxing its citizens by going out and borrowing directly from the public, or thirdly, and the way that's less well known is it can kind of do it secretly and somewhat nefariously by the Fed. It can just issue debt, but then the Fed goes out and prints money to kind of buy that debt.
And that's what you
Uh,
call monetizing the
that's
debt for
that's
somebody not.
monetizing the debt, and they did that heavily during COVID. So what we were proposing to do at the beginning of COVID, of kind of closing down all businesses except those deemed essential businesses, which is
With
another kind of horrific term that we could
Mhm.
talk about, but they basically said, we're going to shut down society. We're going to lock everyone in their home, and we're basically going to turn off the economy. And that was done worldwide, but it was done in every state starting in mid to late March of 2020. And my contention is that if you didn't have the Fed as this backstop to kind of support all of the bills that were passed in short order, I think Trump, original CARES Act was $4 to $5 trillion of money, and there's no way we could have raised taxes to uh, uh, support that kind of hefty bill
Right.
of the block. That would have been, I don't know what it would have done to every person's tax rate, but let's say it would have doubled it or some extreme number. So that would not have sold to the electorate. If it tried to kind of just issue debt without the Fed there and went out in the market and kind of tried to buy that much debt, the yield would soar because that's a huge supply of debt coming onto the market, and soaring yields without the Fed's involvement would have crushed the stock market even more. It went down really sharply when they
Mhm.
first announced the lockdown. So you would have had a stock market that would have been cratered even more, and that would have kind of uh, eliminated any kinds of revenues from capital gains. So the money would have just disappeared. So the only way they could kind of pull off this magical mystery act was to have the Fed expand its balance sheet dramatically and say, okay, whatever you decide you want to spend, we're going to be the backstop to kind of back everything up, and we'll go out and print money and everything's fine. And so that's kind of what they did. And the stock market, after that initial plunge, kind of quickly roared back.
Mhm.
People got free money, in
Mhm.
quotes, sent to them, and everything went on as if it were normal, even though the economy was shut down. And it was just such a odd and unnatural act. And my contention is that if you didn't have the Fed in existence, so or if its powers were sharply curtailed, or if we had a real gold standard that
Right.
kind of constrained what the Fed could do, which used to exist until Nixon severed the
Mhm.
gold standard in 71. There's no way we could have had this gargantuan uh, spending appetite to support the lockdowns, and so we would have had to try to manage society probably according to the principles of the Great Barrington Declaration, because we wouldn't have had an economic choice. So we would have had life go on as normal for the healthy, and we would have tried to have focused protection on those most at risk. But
Mhm.
we would not have had all of the unnatural things that occurred, uh, and we, probably wouldn't have had this. The whole philosophy is stay in your home, stay locked up until the vaccine comes out. And if we didn't have the Fed and no lockdowns, my contention is people probably would have been out and about, and we would have kind of quickly discovered that this scary bogeyman of COVID was not as terrifying
Right.
as portrayed by the media, because we would have quickly discovered that most healthy people were not at severe risk, and it was
Mhm.
really only the older compromised people that were at risk, which we knew all along. That data was apparent, but I think it would
Would
have
have been
sucked.
obvious to people because they could have seen it and felt it and,
Exactly.
experienced it in real life rather than just through the lens of the, mainstream
Right,
government media.
right,
Yeah, they
right.
would have
So,
seen that things weren't as bad. They also would have, if the economy had been shut down, and I would argue that some of that was at the behest of the pharmaceutical industry, which I think you would agree, lockdown to vaccine so that people could, whatever the motive was. And I actually don't think it was entirely profit, but let's just say it was.
mhm.
um, the public would have had such an economic hurt that they would have been out in the streets protesting because they wouldn't have been on like the dole, they wouldn't have.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so and actually one thing to say is that nobody was really, I mean, most people don't understand what that kind of money printing does, and nobody came out and said, "Okay, we're gonna do this, but hold on, because after that, we're gonna have some inflation, and
yeah.
you're gonna feel the hurt of you getting to stay home and getting these stimulation checks and us being able to do that." Do you think I mean, they would never have done that kind of messaging.
Yeah, and we got that inflation in 2022, which was kind of predictable and inevitable, and it's kind of this. I remember one of the early Austrian economic seminars I attended or watched was an experiment in inflation where I don't know if it was Murray Rothbard or one of the leading lights of the Austrian school said, if you if you drop to, if you all of a sudden stuffed everybody's pocket in the world with $1 million and just gave that to every single citizen in the United States, we really didn't get richer. We would have had more paper money and prices would have just gone up to offset that incredible inflation in the monetary supply. And that's kind of what money printing is. It's just the way
Mhm.
the Fed does it. It gets to favor groups first, and it takes a while to seep through to the real consumer economy, which we saw in 2022. And even when that happens, the politicians do not like to point fingers at the Federal Reserve. They start kind of blaming greedy corporations for the rise in prices, or start talking about things being unaffordable as an excuse for yet more government intervention, whether it's price controls or tariffs or other things that will just throw more monkey wrenches in the economy.
Mhm.
So,
And do you think, I mean, I think they probably do that because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get reelected,
yeah, exactly,
you know?
exactly.
Um, what do you make of, the lockdowns at the beginning? Like, what do you make of why they did it? And, like, it was so clear that it wasn't reasonable to think that that was necessary. And people will say, "Oh, it wasn't clear. They were doing the best they can." But I think if you really look back, and I didn't get it right away at the time. I wasn't onto them immediately, but you probably were. What do you think the motive was to completely lock down the economy? And I mean, I'm not. What do you think? What do you think what was behind that? I don't think it was at the highest levels fear of this coronavirus.
Yeah, I still struggle with that because there seem to be so many potential explanations or motivations for what caused it. Some are really deep and dark if
Yeah.
you go down those
Mhm.
holes. So I don't, and, and so I don't have a clear sense of why and how. I mean, that they did it in China, and all of a sudden we kind of emulated the Chinese draconian lockdown models, and we got bamboozled by those early forecasts by the Imperial College and Neil Ferguson, whose track record over the last 25 years was abysmal. I was just
Yeah.
rereading it the other day, and whether it was swine flu or the original virus back in '01 or '03 or whenever it was. I mean, he was off by like
Yeah,
magnitudes
yeah.
on what the fatality rate would be or could be, and yet Harvard and all of the elite institutions quickly fell in line. So I don't. There's so many potential motives. I mean,
Mhm.
one could have been political at some point. They saw that this would undo Trump's
Mhm.
chances at getting reelection if the economy tanked. Uh, there's talk that was an experiment in social control by the intelligence agencies or the global elites. I mean,
That's dark.
I mean, I've read all sorts of
Mhm.
theories on how and why this happened, and I really don't. I still don't have a
Yeah.
great answer or understanding other than saying that it was it, if you tried to stay kind of calm and rational and looked at the early data, it just seemed like an extreme overreaction.
Mhm.
I mean, early on, we had that Diamond Princess ship and all of the
It was
and
like
that
a petri dish, lab experiment.
yeah, and the numbers from that showed that this was not really anything that was probably going to be very different from a normal flu. And then you have
Mhm.
early studies by Jay Bhattacharya and Ioannidis. There's seroprevalence
Mhm.
studies also kind of went totally against the mainstream.
And those showed that the virus had been circulating, in the fall.
Right,
before, like, the case 0 came to town. I mean,
right,
on
right,
I think he did a, seroprevalence in California, right?
right,
And
Santa Clara, yeah.
there was quite a lot of evidence that people had been infected and cleared and got better.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I don't, uh
Well, we may never know. We may
yeah,
never know.
yeah,
But uh
we may not. I mean, it's almost like I've read some of the books by about dark experiments by the CIA back in the 50s and 60s, and
Mm.
it was almost, it was almost if that kind of experiment was carried out on the entire global
Mhm.
population, but as to who the main players were, if there were any, and or whether it was just a case of kind of converging motivations and a susceptible population that kind of picked up momentum, I don't really know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we always think those kinds of things can only happen in the past because 'cause we're so much better now, and yet
Yeah,
it wasn't that long ago when terrible psyops were carried out, but I
yeah,
agree with you. I think it's very hard to know, and I think, like, the convergence of a lot of different desires can push something forward in a way that seems singularly driven, but in fact, it's not. But you have this situation now where we're locking down, and all eyes are now on these vaccines, and we're in the warp speed thing. And um, that's where I think the economic viewpoint of it gets very interesting because when you talk about if we had real free market forces, that would have looked a lot, the landscape would have been very different because we wouldn't have had these quote public private partnerships, which sounds so very good. And there
right.
wouldn't have been favored organizations like Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna in cahoots with the NIH and also Dartmouth and Scripps, as we'll talk about. Talk about if you had a real free market, how that would have been different.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big part of my, uh, talk at the Mises Institute, and I was trying
Mhm.
to be agnostic about whether the vaccines were good or bad, safe or effective, or how long they were efficacious. Uh, one, because I'm not, I hate to use the word, but I'm not an expert in those
Mhm.
areas, not trained in immunology or vaccinology, even though I probably by now have read more than lots of medical doctors out there who I sat with
Yes,
and learned don't have much education in this
right.
subject. But putting
Well,
that
and you
aside,
also have an open mind. You approach it with an open mind,
yeah.
so that's huge, but I agree. Go on.
But so I kind of didn't take a stance on whether they were good or bad. Just uh, tried to make the point that if we had a true medical free market where the government wasn't involved in healthcare, that there would have been uh, market forces where good therapies would have emerged, and we would have kind of discovered them through the normal pricing free market process. And my contention is that the uh, vaccines is kind of an experimental. Let me back up one step.
Sure.
I said not only we needed a free market, but we also needed a free market without the liability shield that the vaccine manufacturers had, because it was those two things that were really the height of crony capitalism. You had kind of favored corporations, plus they were legally protected. So in a free market, uh, with kind of a libertarian law order, uh, transactions would be consensually and freely entered into, but there would be legal mechanisms to protect people against either fraud or force or kind of other injurious actions that occurred either willfully or due to some level of gross negligence. But under COVID, under the policies we had, we didn't have either of those aspects.
Mhm.
So, to me, it was just kind of classic Austrian monopoly crony capitalism theory that when you don't have market forces and kind of legal liability, you get the worst of all worlds. You get a more expensive product, and it really was expensive, even though it was
It was free.
it was free to us. But if you look at the amount of revenue that we paid to Pfizer
Mhm.
versus what it might have cost for uh, just giving vitamin D, uh,
Or some off-label,
or some
hydrochloroquine
off-label,
or
yeah,
yeah.
medications. The price differential was enormous gap between those
Mhm,
2. So you not only had a high price, but you had kind of low quality product without any incentive for true safety testing or
mhm,
monitoring, because when you have a liability shield, it's just moral hazard, that's created, and there's really no incentive for the manufacturer of that product to ensure that it's safe. In fact, as Aaron Siri, I think, just wrote a whole book on vaccines. I'm Amen, and he just did a
mhm,
great job of pointing out how if there's no liability shield, uh, the vaccine manufacturers, it would be kind of foolish for them to engage in rigorous safety testing of their products, because other if they did that, they may not be able to bring the product to market and make
right.
millions and billions. And with the shield, they can kind of
It
skirt on safety and be guaranteed a subsidized, advertised profit stream.
mhm,
So my
it
my my contention is that I just don't think these products would have gained much traction in a truly competitive market, either against other potential vaccines or against other therapeutics.
and like, when you say these products, we're talking about the COVID shots,
Yeah,
because there are 2 main liability shields that exist for
right,
vaccines. One is the 1986, Vaccine Act, which is that covers all the stuff on the child's schedule, and that's bad enough. But the COVID shots, were introduced, and they had PrEP Act coverage, which
right,
is incredibly tight, and
right,
you have to pretty much prove fraud to
right,
clear that PrEP Act. So these products were, no matter what happened to you as a result of taking the products, you have no recourse against the companies um,
right,
at all. And that's what you're talking about with the liability shield, just in case somebody listening doesn't really understand what that is.
right,
Um,
right.
yeah. So if the
And so
oh,
that that
go ahead.
that is not a free market. That's a uh, that's a crony capitalistic market where state and corporate power are kind of merged, and it's pretty much by definition against the public interest, because people aren't allowed to kind of freely choose what products they want. It's kind of forced upon them, and their choices are kind of limited either de facto or de jure. And I think one line in that, you'll probably remember the exact language in the PrEP Act, but I think for the product to get emergency use authorization, they had to show that there was no kind of available competing
Alternative.
alternative. I forget the
Mhm,
exact language, but the existence of that language kind of explains why there was this tremendous smear campaign against ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and why there was like no motivation or really interest top down to investigate alternatives to vaccines.
mhm.
And you could argue, I mean, I've seen the argument, I kind of buy it the more research I've done, that these really weren't vaccines, that they were kind of gene
Mhm.
therapy.
Yeah, they don't work like a traditional vaccine at all. They turn your body into, manufacturing facilities,
Right, right,
and they, and now there's evidence to suggest that there's DNA in the product, and,
right,
that there are all sorts of issues with that. So I don't think they actually, my understanding is they changed the definition of vaccine
right,
right
right,
around this time so that they could call it a vaccine, because our public, really embraces vaccines as safe and effective.
right,
There's a great deal, nobody talks about it, nobody questions it, and I think most people don't even know that if your child is injured by a vaccine, the only recourse you have is to sue the federal government. You can't
right,
sue the company. But what if somebody made the argument, Steve, that we need these public-private partnerships, which you and I know turn into crony capitalism and institutional capture, but we need them because otherwise, who would fund these? much needed research projects. And you could argue that for pharmaceutical companies or private universities. You've been on the inside. I've looked at their numbers. We know they get a lot of money from the
Right,
federal government.
right,
So,
right.
how could you, what would you answer to that challenge that, this has to happen? Otherwise, this research wouldn't get done.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of argument's made a lot, and everything ends up becoming a public good if you try to share your reasoning far enough. And I I'm just a believer that there's uh ec- that there's economic incentive to kind of do research to come up with drugs or therapies that could make a lot of money, and that
Hmm.
if the economics aren't aren't there, uh, or if these products can't be made safely,
Hmm.
why is it necessary? I mean, shouldn't there be consumer sovereignty? And so, if this isn't a desired need of consumers to have this kind of product, who are we to say that that should be overridden by the federal government or the
Hmm.
college universities? I think Hayek had he was one of the leading Austrian economic uh, thinkers, along with von Mises, and Hayek actually shared the Nobel Prize in 1974, and the title of his speech was called "The Pretense of Knowledge," which is quite a speech to read. But the whole point of it was that there's he was kind of contrasting the discovery process of millions of individuals making free transactions, and that a lot of knowledge emerges from that process, whether it's new discoveries, and it's expressed through the price system. That's how people express their preferences and how the economy,
Hmm.
it's kind of he called it the spontaneous order because it's an order that can't be designed by a centralized authority. And he contrasted that with the top down knowledge of so called experts or central planners, and said that it was kind of their fatal conceit that they could kind of know what's best for civilization versus kind of the unplanned interactions of millions of people and entrepreneurs with all this tacit knowledge. So
Hmm.
I'm just uh, I'm a big believer in freedom for its own sake, and that government's powers, if they exist, should be strictly limited and enumerated. But I also think it's kind of uneconomic uh, to have these public-private partnerships that if products or needs can't be met freely through the private market, then it just means that the economy's not kind of ready for that yet. That it has more urgent needs
Right.
that
Or
need to.
maybe they'll never need those products,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they never will. So I think, our government has gotten so huge. So just the limited nature of how it should be, I feel like that horses left the barn. But it brings us to talking about like the agencies, right?
Right.
And I know you're a big fan of abolishing or remodeling. I won't put words in your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like the CDC, the FDA, perhaps other ones. Talk a little bit about that and what you think it would look like if we got rid of them. But first, let me say that, like, just the FDA. I mean, they are about 50% funded by
Right.
pharma, and this
Right.
came about because they wanted to be more efficient in their approval of drugs and get them to market faster. So they instituted, as I understand it, these user fees.
Mhm.
And I worked in the pharmaceutical industry at the time, and it's like, well, that makes sense, right? So you pay when you put an application in to help staff the people who are going to, approve it. And it seems like a good idea, but then all of a sudden, half of the people are being paid by big pharma. So, you just have all this institutional capture. Anyway, so talk about the three-letter agencies and what it would look like if we didn't have them or if they functioned differently.
Yeah, I would, if I could wave a magic wand, they wouldn't be there, and uh, because I think they just will become captured over time, and they'll either be answering to uh, corporate power or bureaucratic power, with the bureaucrats trying to kind of entrench their uh, position and their job
Mhm.
security and building their empires. And so I think neither of those are ideal. And so my contention, which I made at the Mises presentation, is that uh, safety is a market good, and there's this kind of assumption that um, that if we didn't have the FDA, there would be no analogous kind of mechanism to kind of give ratings on products or ensure that they're safe. And
Mhm.
there are organizations that do attest to the safety of products in other industries. And my contention is that safety would be a market good that either people or the insurers or doctors or those at liability risk would uh, pay for, and that it would evolve on the market and it would be responsive to consumers. And if it didn't offer a good product and had losses, it would disappear on the market, or it would get replaced by a more efficient provider of kind of certification safety standards. And that over time, we probably would have standards that would industry standards that would emerge, which happen in kind of other less regulated areas of the market. And those industry standards, they could vary based on the type of drug or device that was at play, or they could vary based on who the consumer was. If it
Mhm.
was a cancer patient that was close to terminal state, maybe those industry standards would say, that that person can take in a highly
Mhm.
experimental drug that hasn't had much testing, uh, but there would be some kind of disclosure of the risk and an agreement signed by that patient.
Mhm.
Would more A more responsive marketplace with kind of freedom and market prices, kind of uh, just providing a more efficient, I think, fairer and ethical kind of medical system.
So, really private organizations being able to certify, sort of like the good
Yeah.
housekeeping seal of approval, at the yeah, and that happens in many industries right now.
Right. Right.
But for some reason, for food and drugs, we've come to think that only these
Right.
agencies can get product can make us have choices that are safe.
Right.
Um,
I'm
do you
I'm
think
in the I'm in the middle of reading. I just started. It was there've been other books I've read on the progressive era. There was one by Gabriel Kolko, Kolko. I forget when it was written. It was decades ago, but he was probably from the more left side of the spectrum. And there was another one written by a historian slash economist named Arthur Eckhart, Ekirch. But Murray Rothbard had a book on the progressive era that uh, a scholar at the Mises Institute kind of edited and finished it out, because a lot of it was based on handwritten notes that Murray had, and he kind of put this book together. And the whole thesis of that book was that a lot of these agencies uh, that were formed at the turn of the uh, 20th century in various industries really were at the behest of uh, big business that was trying to keep smaller competitors
Mhm.
at bay, and they were kind of using the government to kind of cartelize their industry, whether it was in railroads, meat packing, or food. And you could argue that the same thing has really happened, and it certainly happened in the vaccine
Mhm.
industry during COVID, but it's probably happened in pharmaceuticals as well. So there's this kind of civics minded assumption that the regulators are out for the public good and the public interest, and that's kind of the myth. And the fact may well be that uh, a lot of these big businesses saw a great opportunity to cartelize their market by using these three-letter agencies to give a seal of approval, and then, of course, they have and it happened back then. I was reading his chapter on the railroads in the, uh, 1800s, and a lot of those, commissioners on the Interstate Commerce Commission, a lot of them went to, uh, go on to work as attorneys or executives at the big railroads, to whom they had just given this great beneficent rate shield for their product.
Mhm. No,
So
and I think that's I mean, having been in the pharmaceutical industry, you can see how that's sort of a natural thing because you're working closely with the agencies, and so I don't think everyone that happens to is, um, nefarious, but it
right,
is but you start out thinking one thing, and then you get too cozy with the fox.
right, right,
And
right,
then
right,
they're in your hen house, but, I don't think it's just for approvals. I think have a lot of industries that, um, standards or regulations are put in place that, for instance, I was at Joel Salatin's farm at a,
mhm,
Brownstown event at Polyface, and he was just talking about how when he wants to butcher some of his cattle, he could do that or chickens or whatever they were, he could do that at his own farm. And he could do it efficiently, he could do it safely, cleanly, really well, but he can't do it because regulations specify that he has to have, like, 2 certain kinds of bathrooms and,
right,
all these things. So what it ends up happening is his farm as a small provider is prohibited from being in that market because he can't afford to meet the standards that, like, I don't know, a huge meat packer could make, so it benefits the huge meat packer, and then they end up doing it's so wasteful and it's so injurious to small business, but I think so, I think it's designed that way, and the agencies seem to be the, the mouthpiece of that, or, the people that set those regulations, and I do think it is often on behest of the corporations, even though the people setting those regulations may indeed think they're just keeping the public safer.
right, and there probably are, some good, hardworking, plenty of
Of
honest
course.
people at those agencies. I'm not
Yes,
meaning to kind of impugn
of
everyone
course.
there. I'm talking more about the institutional incentives that are created by this kind of enmeshing of corporate and agency interests that result in regulatory capture that actually harms the public and limits choice and
Mhm.
opportunity and freedom.
Well, I think one really great example is the development of certain technologies that were used across many COVID vaccine platforms. And you talked about that, and you and I both know it was a technology developed at Scripps, Dartmouth, and the NIH.
Right.
Um, and the most obvious thing is that when Moderna paid the NIH their 400 million, but it wasn't just Moderna that used it, it was other vaccine companies too, because it was a pretty universal technology. And then you have these institutions such as Dartmouth who profited, like, I think they got at least 160 million from that technology for a product that they in turn were mandating to
Right.
their students. And there was nobody raised an eyebrow there, and nobody felt like it was, a real conflict of interest.
Yeah,
You know, there wasn't
I
even the question of it.
yeah, I mean, I wrote a letter, or email to the development office explaining why I would refuse to donate anymore, and I specifically mentioned that conflict of interest and its non-disclosure, and, I never received a response from the
Mhm,
development office, so I don't even know what they were thinking, but I'm sure you kind of ran into similar roadblocks with the no college mandate
mhm.
movement. I mean, that was to me just an egregious conflict that you're making lots of money off a product that you're then mandating to your students,
Who don't need it and
who don't need it.
who are being injured by it, because
Right,
those young men, especially
right,
athletic young men, I mean, it's very clear that they were at risk of myocarditis, and there's no
right,
such thing, I don't care what anyone says, as a little myocarditis,
right, right,
a little
right,
heart disease.
right.
Um, and also, let me say that just looking at the financial incentives, which again, I don't think these people are nefarious, but when you have somebody who's setting the COVID policy for your institution, as was the case at a certain Ivy League school, whose lab is funded at the tune of $750,000 a year by the NIH, and you're the person in charge of that policy, you are not going to step out of line. You're not gonna really challenge that narrative because you've got your whole lab funding from that.
Right, right.
So yeah, it's a real problem. Do you think, the more I look at how things are running, the more of a mess it all seems. I mean, it's just like this imbroglio of all these interests. And do you think, and then you have this purity of Austrian economics, and if you could just wind it back to smaller government and all these things, things would work. Um, First, like, do you think there's any hope? Like, what is it gonna take to reset the system?
Yeah,
And you could even pick just one part of the system. Maybe it's the Fed, maybe it's the
yeah.
FDA,
Well,
what's it gonna take?
yeah, I think it depends on the area you're talking about. Just sticking to the medical, pharmaceutical side of things. I mean, I am hope my big hope, of course, would be the abolition of a lot of these top-down federal agencies and shrinking the size of the federal government. Uh, Absent that, I think decentralization is a positive hope and kind of the assertion of uh, efforts by individual states to kind of
Mhm.
set their own path in this. So I am encouraged that states like Idaho, where
Oh,
Leslie Nukian has been involved, and I think there's what 5 or 6 other states that are kind of adopting a medical freedom act that's analogous to what Idaho's put in place. So I think
which it's
there
worth
is
noting that
there
that
is hope
medical
on that front.
Yeah, that Medical Freedom Act, everyone should look it up. I'll link to it in the show notes. What it does, it establishes that you don't have to opt out of any treatment, any test, any wearable. Um, you are not even subject to those things, even in an emergency. You can participate fully in society without having to be tested, masked,
Mhm.
any cream on your face. Whatever remedy they're proposing, and they are working with Stand for Health Freedom, which is Leah. Oh gosh, I can't think of her last name right now, which is really embarrassing. But that's an organization that has people on the ground in every state. So I agree with you. I think that states are the hope that
Yeah,
can pass those things. But go on.
but just so states are the hope, but certain levels, another kind of bigger picture level, uh, this is more of kind of a more pessimistic view that this whole uh, situation we've been in where the Fed has kind of backstopped everything, and it's not just making the lockdowns and the mandates possible by printing that money, but they've also is without kind of getting into specific hot zones, they've financed the military industrial
Mhm.
complex. You know, we've funded all of these nations that are embroiled in these forever wars, and again, something like that would not be uh, possible, or certainly not to the same extent, if we didn't have kind of the Fed printing this blank check that enables us to have 700 bases overseas and to kind of give arms and aid to every country that for the moment is considered a good guy in our eyes, and that can change from day to day and hour to hour.
Depending on if the people in power in this country feel like it benefits them.
Right. So,
It's really immoral, and
yeah,
so I'm with you, like, and
and
they're just making up money to carry out those policies.
so sadly, I think given that the Fed who really had in their they back starting the quantitative easing, also known as printing machine, and so I sadly don't think this will end until there's a real crisis in either the dollar or the bond market, where uh, the government just kind of federal government can't carry on its operations, and there's kind of a market revolt against bond rates. So I that's basically saying we seem destined at some point, if we stay on this path, for some kind of major financial collapse, and it may not be in our lifetime or the lifetime of our kids, but I think it's just inevitable that you can't keep printing the money without destroying the currency or the bond market. And
Mhm.
so when that happens, uh, that could that could be the opportunity for a reset. Now, whether
Mhm.
it will be a reset with good things happening, or whether it will be a reset where we have a strong man, strong woman that takes over and rules
Where we'll own nothing and be
society.
happy.
Yes. So I don't know how that will unfold, but
Mhm.
I've yet to see kind of any true discipline from either a fiscal or monetary sense, and this will probably anger Trumpians listening to the call, but I think that we really have a uniparty system, and you and I were talking about this offline before the call started, uh, that the that the National Vaccine Act, the Childhood Vaccine Act, was in '86, which was in the Reagan
Mhm.
administration. The PrEP Act was under Bush.
Mhm.
And then the CARES Act, which sent all this free money to people in lockdowns, occurred under Trump. And so,
He got it rolling, yep.
yeah, so you got it rolling. So that's three Republican presidents. And there's kind of this myth that the Republicans are more of a free market, fiscally conservative
Yeah.
party, and uh, or the party that might be more aligned with medical freedom, and it's just simply not true. I think outside of a few brave voices like Ron Johnson or Massey or Rand Paul,
Mhm.
we really have a uniparty down in Washington. So
Yeah. I
unless
completely agree. And I think further, I think that the like, when you look at those 3 things that were ushered in under Republicans, which are, all really big moral hazards, right? The
right,
PrEP Act, um, it's possible that a Democrat couldn't have gotten those through because the people on the right who would normally oppose that would have opposed it. It's like the left is can be really good at, going to war, right?
yeah,
Because the left used to be reliable anti-war, but you get somebody like an Obama or some charismatic left leader, they can really expand the empire,
right,
without a
right,
lot of protest. So
right,
it's I think it's, we're designed to be really at each other's throats and at the polls, um, and it's very effective for the uniparty, and I agree with you, and until I don't know what it's gonna take. I think our media is not free and fair. I don't, um it's really comfortable for people to be tribal.
right,
You get to
right,
feel right, you get to feel
right,
self-righteous, but we all have to I mean, I'm just hoping that through these conversations, maybe some people are gonna be listening that weren't in lockstep with us during the lockdowns and COVID and might think, "Oh, well, maybe there's another way to think about something." So, that's my hope in
yeah.
a
I
small
feel like
way.
all I can do and you've tried to do is one person at a time, spread our ideas, meet
Mhm.
more people, and uh, I don't know what it was, RFK, the original RFK, the
The
Bobby
original.
Kennedy, his Ripples of Hope speech she gave in South Africa about just spreading one ripple of hope, and you kind of don't know how far that will go or where it will ultimately end up, and that's kind of all we can do and keep marching on and fighting down this course.
Mhm. No, I think COVID was a really good, lesson on that because people like you, um, and many people I knew, they they questioned the narrative, and by doing that, they gave other people cover, to the extent we weren't censored at the time, which was a real problem, of course, but, and then you find each other, and then you can have discussions. Like, I know one of the things that I'm doing, I'm hosting a brownstone supper club in my town, and one of the really surprising things about that to me has been some of the people who attend, I'm surprised to see. I didn't realize that they were interested in having these discussions, and there's a wide variety of like the politics where they come from. So that's very exciting. I want to talk now. It's a little bit of a pivot.
Okay.
You are a very accomplished high school tennis coach where you live, and you've been doing that for some time. It's a passion of yours. I know that.
Right.
And one thing you said to me was you bring um, stoic philosophy to your coaching to make a good team. And I'm sure you bring that too to your life. Talk a little bit about that and how that works, and
Yeah.
how the young and also what you're seeing in these young people that you're coaching, how they respond to that, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about what COVID did to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe since I'm not a great tennis player, I have to like use stoicism to get to my players, and they'll just listen to the true pros on how to hit the ball and serve. But I basically I've been this will be my third year as head coach, and I was an assistant 1 year before that. But uh, my philosophy that I borrowed from the Stoics and a lot that I've read about them or read directly from them was to really have this mindset of, the Stoics were, uh, they're kind of miscast as kind of not having emotions at
Mhm.
all, being straight faced and unemotional. And that's nothing could be farther from the truth. What they really tried to emphasize was how to uh, get rid of or deal with negative emotions. It was kind of the uh, nefarious power of negative emotions that they were trying to counter. So that's kind of what I try to stress to our team. And one uh, aspect that we try to go over quite a bit, and we hammer it into their heads all year long from the first scrimmage, is this concept of the what you can control versus what you can't control. And a lot
Mm.
of coaches have used that. And so specifically on the tennis court, I've always said that the only three things that you can control any practice or any match are your effort level, your attitude on court, and your sportsmanship. That we can't control what the weather's like on any day. It might be a really windy, blustery day where it's hard to get your first serve in, or where your ground strokes are spraying wildly. We can't control how you're feeling that day.
Mm.
We can't control whether you're up against an opponent that's really an elite player or is on a hot streak. But so it doesn't do any good to like worry about those things in advance because we can't change those and we can't change them in the moment. The weather is going to be what it's going to be. So if we just stay focused on how hard we're trying, that we're maintaining a positive attitude point to point, supporting our teammates, and that we're above all uh, showing great sportsmanship, not only towards the other team, but towards our own players, that will end up resulting in uh, probably good outcomes for us as a team and you as an individual. So we talk about that a lot more than we do what our one loss record is, or where we're ranking in the state seedings, or what our standings are in the league. And we tried to change that culture from, I think, what might go on at other sports where it's very results
Mm.
oriented. And my thought also is a lot of these students are under a lot of other pressures, whether it's social media pressure,
Mm.
academic pressure, uh, pressure to get into the school they want to get into. And we wanted to make tennis something that was uh, a great outlet, that was enjoyable, and where they could kind of learn a lot of life lessons, but
Mhm.
not be a situation where we were throwing yet another pressure obligation on them. So we just have, and we do lots of little things that kind of practice to keep that mindset alive. Uh, we try to vary our practices a lot in terms of bringing in outside pros to help, how we structure what we do at each practice, mixing up the lineups, and we probably put a lot more thought into what we do at practice than when we get to the match, because when the match happens, the player's on the court and you can talk to them only a few times during a set or a match, and you can
Mhm.
kind of give them a little strategy and try to calm them down. But it's really the practices that are the building blocks. And
And and all of those things are applicable to any endeavor in life.
yeah,
Like, I was sitting here thinking about at whatever age you are, whatever, thing you're undertaking, if you approach it with those principles, you
yeah,
could substitute sportsmanship, but even sportsmanship, you if people had good sportsmanship, even off the sports court,
right,
we'd have everything would just be better.
right, right, right.
Um,
Yeah,
and
if we had civility and
yeah,
sense of equipoise in our political discussions,
yeah.
we'd be a lot better. And probably we've in terms of results, we've had really good players. They work hard in the off season. They work with a lot of pros, and so we can't take much credit for that. And we've had two really good seasons in a row where they made the state semifinals, which was the first time our school's done that in women's tennis, to do that back to back years. But I think what I was most proud of was this past year, our team received the Team Sportsmanship
Oh,
Award, which is voted upon by the other coaches in our league. And I told them that usually the team that finishes first, and we were undefeated in our league this year, past year, usually that team does not get a sportsmanship award, either because they're cocky about their success and they
uh-huh.
show that on the court, or other teams are resentful or envious that they lost to you. So I was just very proud that we didn't succumb to any of those negative
Mhm.
emotions, and that the other coaches voted us that award. And I think it was the first time our programs ever received that award. And I
Oops.
keep telling them, uh, I don't know if you'll remember what your individual record was or how far our team went in the playoffs, but I hope 30 years from now that you remember that your team got the Team Sportsmanship Award your junior or senior year.
It's very moving. It's really great. I bet you're really engendering gracefulness in these young people. Um, One other question I wanted to ask before I ask you my final question is, what did you see? Were you coaching during COVID?
And
No, because
I was at a
everything was
distance
locked
then.
down.
Yeah,
Mm.
well, uh, I was not on the coaching staff then. During that period of time, there were a handful of players on the team that I would train with in the off
Mhm.
season. I would usually hit with them in a local pro, and that was kind of my entree to the tennis team, and I would go watch a lot of their matches, but,
Mhm.
I wasn't on the coaching staff when COVID happened. It was, uh, upsetting for a lots of reasons when the season was canceled and when school was closed, not the least of which was that the team that we were going to have that, uh, spring of 2020 might have been our best team ever, and it was topped by this, girl named Lexi Dwyer, who actually went on to play at Dartmouth College and made
Mhm.
Ivy doubles her first team doubles her senior year. And we just had a great team that year, and they were all seniors in high school. And so
Mm.
they were kind of uh, denied a chance to compete for a state title, which I think they took that much better than I did. I was
Well, you'll just have to go back to the Stoicism study there,
Yeah,
Steve.
I know, I know. I was upset about the lockdowns for lots of reasons, and
Yeah, yeah.
that was one of them.
Do the kids ever talk about it, or is it in the rearview mirror for them?
I think it's kind of in the, I think it's in the rearview mirror for a lot of,
A lot of
people.
people.
I
Yeah, yeah.
know. It's kind of, not much forgiving, but a lot of forgetting.
I know, and I still wanna talk about it.
Yeah,
I
no,
still wanna talk about it because,
yeah.
it was insane, and we
Yeah,
forget.
and a lot of the consequences we're still dealing with, whether it's,
Yeah.
the inflationary economy, whether it's, uh, learning standards have gone down, and drug
Could
use has gone up and
yeah.
mental health issues have gone up, and it kind of set a lot of those train wrecks in motion.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
yeah. Alright, so, I always like to ask people I speak to on this podcast, we're living in a very chaotic environment, it seems to me, maybe it's just because 'cause I'm getting to be an older lady, I think things are much worse than they used to be in terms of chaos and, strife and conflict. Um, what do you do to stay sane and centered and, well during this? How do you maintain some kind of productive, peaceful life?
Yeah, I think I read something the other, I try to remember what it said now. I'm probably gonna get it wrong, but it was some psychological study article about that that said the, uh, 2 things that kind of underpin a life of virtue and happiness, kind of the 2 most important traits are, uh, sense of humor and love of learning. So I try to have both of those. I might not have been very humorous on this call because we were talking about
Serious
serious
things.
matters and
Yeah.
some going down some dark avenues. But I really uh, I have more of a dry sense of humor, and I know our tennis team and my wife certainly perceives that, and people that know me well know that. And uh, the love of learning.
Oh, you sure have that in spades. I mean, you're
Certainly
remarkable that
motivates
way.
me. I mean, I told someone just the other day, I never gave a single thought about a vaccine my whole life until 2020, and then I
Yeah.
kind of went down that, uh, rabbit hole, and I'm just that way on a variety of subjects, and, and
Mhm,
I do the normal things like, I work out and play a lot of tennis. It's
mhm.
to stay healthy and, mind and body and kind of on the sense of humor thing. Every morning, the first thing I look at in the newspaper is the obituaries because I just want to make sure that mine's not one of them. So I always I read the obits first, then I do the crossword puzzle, and then I read the sports page. So that's kind of my
Your morning
you know,
routine.
my morning routine.
I love it. I love it. This is the part where I learn the most out of every conversation. So I'm taking humor and curiosity away from this.
Yeah, right.
Um, well, good. Steve, I can't thank you enough for talking to
All
me.
right.
It's just been wonderful. And let's do this again.
Okay. It
And
was great,
um,
Joni.
is there anywhere where people can find you online that you want to make a note
No, I
of?
mean,
Um,
people can email me. I'm happy for you to give them my email. I
okay,
don't
I'll put that in the
do it.
show notes.
Yeah, I don't do any Substack or anything
Mhm,
like that. Occasionally, I've written articles for Lou Rockwell's website. He's the co-founder of the Mises
mhm,
Institute, and I've written articles in various other places. But is you said I do a lot of connecting and reading
mhm.
and stay kind of below the radar screen.
All right. Well,
But
we need
I'm happy to meet people through email and strike up more friendships, which was one of the great things about the last 5 years. Is I
yeah,
met all, and you, I'm sure, feel the same way. I
I
mean,
do.
I may have lost friends who thought I was nuts or
Dangerous.
dangerous, but I met a lot of interesting people that I would have never guessed that I would have met in a million years.
Yeah, same for me. So anyway, I'm just so glad that we're connected and
Yeah.
um, I'm gonna say we'll say goodbye, but stay on because I need to upload the
Okay.
stream until that.
Okay.
So thanks again,
Okay.
Steve.
Thanks.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.
Don't go anywhere.